Thanks for joining me in today's video Bible study. I'm Ryan Goodwin. I preach for the East Shelby Church of Christ in Collierville, Tennessee. If you have questions or comments about what we study today, you can leave them in the comments section below. Or if you'd like to learn more about East Shelby, you can find info at eastshelby.com. Turning your Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. We've been going through Ecclesiastes lately, and we're all the way up to chapter 10. So we'll begin in chapter 10 and verse 1. It says, "Dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink, so a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him toward the left. Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool. If the ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your post, because composure allays great offenses." Now, in these introductory verses, we learn a few things about small things. That's what chapter 10 is about, by the way. If you could sum up Ecclesiastes chapter 10 in just a few words, it's about the importance of small things. That sometimes it's the little things that make the biggest difference. And that can be good and that can be bad. In the case of verse 1, he talks about dead flies making a perfumer's oil stink. Now, I know a dead fly is a very small thing, just as a hair in a bowl of soup is a very small thing. But if you were at a restaurant and you got a bowl of soup and there was someone else's hair draped casually across the top of it, what would you do with that bowl of soup? Of course, you'd ask the waiter to take it back. You might not even go to that restaurant ever again given that experience. But it's just a hair, isn't it? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that hair is very small, and in all likelihood, that hair is not going to carry disease. It's not going to hurt you to have a hair on your soup. So, a dead fly in a perfumer's oil might not literally make the whole thing stink, but in perception, it does. You take something that smells good, something that is inherently a good and positive thing, be it the perfumer's oil or a bowl of soup or hand lotion or anything like that, something that is an inherently good thing, and just put one little bad thing in it, and the whole thing is ruined. The entire bowl of soup, the entire vial of perfume, the entire book, the entire restaurant. I mean, and for some of us, an entire vacation, right? You might go on a vacation somewhere, and because of one small bad experience, the entire vacation is ruined for you. I mean, you might go to Chili's, and you might have something nasty in your food at Chili's, a fingernail or something like that. And you might never eat at a Chili's restaurant ever again. And that's the power of little things. Like I said, sometimes it's the little things in life that can make the biggest difference. Now, he goes on to say there in verse 2 that a wise man's heart, right, a very little part of your body, in a literal sense, of course, but, you know, your heart is just a very small part of your body. Your will, your desire, it directs you, though. A wise man's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him toward the left. To me, this is very reminiscent of what is said back in James chapter 3. Go to the New Testament. And if you notice in James chapter 3, when he's talking about the tongue or the use of the tongue, language, words, he says in James chapter 3 and verse 5, "So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts great things. How great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire." In that same context, he mentions the way that the rudder is a very small part of the ship. Similarly, the tongue is a very small part of our bodies, but our entire lives can be directed by the words that we say, just as a great, massive ship can be directed by just a very small thing like a rudder. That's the power of very little things. And even, it says in verse 3, back in our text in Ecclesiastes 10, "Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking. He demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool." A little bit of sense would help us all. If you're walking down the street, you're walking down the sidewalk or something like that, All it takes is a little bit of concentration, a little bit of situational awareness to not run into a lamppost or a mailbox. When you're riding your bike down the road, you're in the bike lane, you believe that you're safe. All it takes is a little bit of awareness of your surroundings to not get run over by a car. I mean, just a little bit of sense helps us to be more aware of what's going on around us, helps us to be more aware of what's happening in our lives, helps us to be more aware of what's happening in our jobs or in our congregations. And I think that's what he's saying here is, when the fool walks down the road, his sense is lacking. Everybody can tell that he's a fool because he does not take the little steps necessary to just make good choices in life. And so he trips over here and he runs into this thing over there. And he's walking with his shoes untied. And he's got gum or toilet paper stuck to the bottom of his feet. And just a little bit of sense, a little bit of awareness would have made a big difference in that person's life. Verse 4, if the ruler's temper rises against you, he says, do not abandon your post, because composure allays great offenses. Now what he's saying there is, a little bit of composure, just a little bit of taking responsibility for your actions, being honest, staying at your post makes a huge difference in your life. Now, it's unclear in verse 4, are we talking about a situation where the ruler's temper rises against you unfairly? Like maybe the king is just in a bad mood and he's looking for someone to blame. And so he just so happens to pick you, you're at the wrong place at the wrong time. Or are we talking about a situation where you have done something wrong, where you did mess up? It was your fault, it was your project, you were the one who was the point man on that, and it was a disaster, and it was your fault. Whether you're talking about something that comes upon you accidentally, or something that you totally deserve because it was on you, either way, the point he's making remains the same. Composure allays great offenses. Stay at your post. Take responsibility, remain calm, and take your lumps. And just a little bit of that makes a huge difference in your life. Now let's move on here to verse 5. This is Ecclesiastes 10, and notice verse 5. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, like an error which goes forth from the ruler. Folly is set in many exalted places, while rich men sit in humble places. I've seen slaves riding on horses and princes walking like slaves on the land. Sometimes there's a role reversal that just doesn't fit who people are based on their behavior. Now, when he talks about I have seen slaves riding on horses and princes walking like slaves on the land, I think he means slaves in the sense of slaves to your desires, slaves to foolishness, slaves to your mistakes. That I have seen people who are deserving of punishment. They are deserving of low status. They are deserving of obscurity. And yet somehow or another they rise to the rank of ruler. And that's an unfortunate thing, isn't it? Now, I don't want to make any kind of political statement here because you know me. I mean, if you know me at all, you know that I'm not particularly political. So this is not a political statement, but in any country's history, whether you're talking about kings or presidents or whatever, in any country's history, there have been times where the worst person possible could have become king or ruler of that country. That he's a fool, he's a bore, he makes great mistakes, and his mistakes are very public and very obvious to people, but somehow or another, that person becomes ruler of the land. And there are more deserving people, more intelligent people, more patient people, more informed people, and somehow or another, they remain in obscurity. Isn't it such a strange thing, such a strange thing that we observe throughout human history, that it is often the least deserving people that hold great positions of power and influence, while the most deserving people remain in obscurity. And for Solomon, who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, presumably, he views this in verse 5 as a great evil under the sun. This is a great evil under the sun. Go on to verse 8 now, Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 8. He who digs a pit may fall into it, and a serpent may bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits logs may be endangered by them. Verse 10. If the axe is dull and he does not sharpen its edge, then he must exert more strength. Wisdom has the advantage of giving success. Verse 11. If the serpent bites before being charmed, there is no profit for the charmer. Now we'll go and stop there at verse 11. Verses 8 through 11 talk about just little things that can be done to make your job easier. The example he gives in verse 8, that he who digs a pit may fall into it, just a little bit of awareness, just understanding that you just dug a pit, so kind of be careful where you step. A little bit of awareness would help you not fall into the pit that you just dug for yourself. A little bit of awareness may help you. A serpent may bite him who breaks through a wall. As you're trying to knock a wall over, and you have to understand that the wall he's talking about here would be like piles of stones. That's how they would build walls back then, when they would separate pieces of property, right? This is my property over here, that's your property over there, and we're going to pile up stones in a wall to show the separation. Now, if you're kind of knocking that stone wall over, maybe to build another stone wall, if you just show a little bit of awareness and understand that when you're sticking your hand in the nooks and crannies and the crevices of a stone wall, there's probably going to be snakes in there. That little bit of awareness will go a long way. Now, in my backyard here in northern Mississippi, I say here in northern Mississippi, I preach in Collierville, Tennessee, but I live on the other side of the state line in DeSoto County, Mississippi. But in my backyard in northern Mississippi, we have a pond, and we love it. We love to have a pond. We love the bullfrogs and the lightning bugs, and we love to go out on our kayak and kind of paddle around the pond. But one thing that you have to be very aware of is the snakes. I mean, it's a fact. It is what it is. There are cottonmouths back there. There are copperheads in the woods behind our house. There are ticks in the brush. There's a lot of things that you just have to be aware of. If you're going to go romping through the woods, if you're going to go swimming in a pond, if you're going to go fishing next to the lake, a little bit of awareness, a little bit of preparation goes a long way. It takes 30 seconds to spray some DEET around your legs to keep the ticks off. It takes 30 seconds to just scan the bank of your pond where you're going to go fishing and just make sure that you're not setting up your camping chair on top of a cottonmouth snake. It just takes a little bit. Remember, that's what Ecclesiastes 10 is all about, is the little things, the power of small things. He offers another example there in verse 9. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them. He who splits logs may be endangered by them. Just understand the danger that surrounds you. Understand that accidents don't happen because we plan on them happening. Accidents happen because we fail to plan for the eventuality, the possibility that there's some danger in what we're doing. If the axe is dull and he does not sharpen its edge in verse 10, then he must exert more strength. 5 minutes of preparation, 5 minutes of sharpening your axe, 5 minutes of putting a new blade on something, 5 minutes of charging batteries. I mean, all it takes is just a little bit of effort to do some prep work, and it makes your job run so much smoother. My wife and I love to watch cooking shows, and just whatever is on Food Network and that sort of thing. We love the cooking competition shows. There's a term in cooking, and by the way, I'm not a chef, so I might not even be pronouncing it correctly, but there's a term in cooking called mise en place, and it's the idea of getting all of your stuff ready before you start to cook something. You make sure that you've measured out everything that you're going to need for that recipe, that you've diced the vegetables, you've got your salt out, you've got your seasonings, you've prepared the pots and the pans. Mise en place is the idea of get everything ready to go before you start cooking. That way, while you're in the midst of cooking, you're not panicking and looking and wondering, oh, what did I do with this? And where is this thing? And, I forgot to dice the shallots. Right? You've prepared everything in advance so that when you actually begin the cooking process, it runs more smoothly. I think the same is true of home improvement projects, gardening, camping, vacations. Just get your stuff ready. The little things, a little bit of preparation goes a long way in helping a project or an activity run more smoothly. But let's dig a little deeper, because he also adds in verse 10, wisdom has the advantage of giving success. We're not just talking about sharpening your axe, putting a new blade on the razor blade. We're not just talking about dicing your shallots before you start to cook. What we're really talking about in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 is the little things that we need to be doing spiritually to prepare ourselves for the challenges that life is going to offer to us. Are you preparing the best way that you can for parenting? Are you preparing the best way that you can for the challenges of marriage? Are you preparing the best that you can for the challenges of taking up leadership in the church? When you're 30 years old, and you're a young man and you're helping in whatever way you can in the church, are you doing the things at 30 years old that is going to get you ready to serve as an elder when you're 50 years old or 60 years old? Are you doing right now as a young parent, when your kids are young, they're toddlers or whatever, are you doing what you need to do right now to help you with whatever challenges you're going to face 10 years from now when your kids are teenagers and they face new kinds of temptations? In your personal Bible study, are you laying a good foundation in your Bible study so that you're understanding the fundamentals of the Bible, the basics of the Bible, that you know the books of the Bible, the structure of the Bible, that you know who the main characters of the Bible are, so that when it gets to be time to study the harder stuff, the more challenging things in the Bible, that you've put the effort into the little things over here. And it makes Bible study a lot easier. Whatever spiritual discipline we're talking about, whether it's worship or our prayer life, meditation, or personal evangelism, reaching people with the gospel, in a spiritual sense, wisdom has the advantage of giving success, because wisdom tells you, do the little things, the little daily activities that set you up for long-term, big picture spiritual success. There's patience as well. I think that's what verse 11 is about. If the serpent bites before being charmed, there's no profit for the charmer. I think that's just the idea that, if you're the snake charmer, you need to make sure that you're being patient with things. Let things develop as they are. You can't get ahead of yourself. You can only charm the snake as long as the snake wants to be charmed. And you can't force things to happen before they're ready. So let's move on to verse 12 now. Words from the mouth of a wise man are gracious, while the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of his talk is folly, and the end of it is wicked madness. Yet the fool multiplies words. No man knows what will happen, and who can tell him what will come after him? Oh, the toil of the fool so wearies him that he does not even know how to go to a city. Little things like your words. We've already made a reference to James chapter 3. I think we're still talking about something similar to that idea. Words from the mouth of a wise man are gracious, he says. The lips of a fool consume him. While the wise man is building up other people, the wise man is offering encouragement and education and rebuke and criticism at times when it's necessary. He is using his words to build up the people around him, while the fool's words are consuming himself. He is destroying himself. It is self-destruction that's happening when the fool speaks. And yet, he continues to make it worse for himself. Instead of closing his mouth, he continues to speak. The beginning of his talk is folly, and the end of it is wicked madness. He starts with folly, but it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And the end of it is wicked madness. I think we've probably all had conversations like this where maybe it's from personal experience. I know I've stuck my foot in my mouth quite a bit. I talk for a living, so sticking my foot in my mouth is inevitable. But we've all had these conversations where you say one kind of stupid thing, and to cover your bases, you have to say something that's even more stupid. And to cover your bases there, you got to say something over here. But to cover this base, you got to say something over here. And before we know it, we are defending a position that is so ridiculous and so outlandish. We never anticipated that it was going to end up in that place. The beginning of his talk is folly. And as if that's not bad enough, he just keeps talking and talking and talking, and it gets worse and worse and worse until the end of it is wicked madness. So here's the little thing. A little bit of wisdom comes in and says, just stop now. Quit digging a hole for yourself. I mean, that's the old saying, isn't it? The first thing you need to do to get out of a hole is to stop digging. And if you've dug a hole for yourself in the words that you're using, in the language that you're using, if you've dug a hole for yourself by making some kind of misstatement or an error in judgment, or maybe you've defended a political position that in the end it's just not tenable, it's not good or wise or right, instead of continuing to dig and to dig your feet in and defend a position that's wrong or foolish, just quit it. Stop talking. Get your foot out of your mouth and start listening more. Going back to the book of James, there's a lot of wisdom in what James says in James chapter 1, where he says in James chapter 1 and verse 21, therefore, he says, verse 19, James chapter 1, verse 19, this you know, my beloved brethren, let everyone be quick to hear, but slow to speak, and slow to anger. Just quit talking. Quit digging a hole for yourself. And yet, verse 14 says, the fool multiplies words. In spite of the way that he's just destroying himself with his language, yet the fool multiplies words. And he ends this section here in verse 15 by saying, the toil of a fool so wearies him that he doesn't even know how to go to a city. Well, now what he's saying there is, he's not even able to do something that's obvious, right? That anybody should be able to do this, and the fool can't do it because he's so wearied himself with his toil. Understand in this time period that roads always led to a town. If you found a road, right, you're out in the wilderness, you don't know where you are, and you find a road, all you have to do is follow that road, and you will find a village or a town or a city of some kind. Roads didn't just go off into the middle of nowhere back then. This was not a time period when they built roads off into national parks just so you could see nature. Okay, roads never just went to nowhere. In this time period, roads always went to a town. So, hypothetically, even a complete fool, if he just found a road and followed it, would be able to find a city. But the toil of a fool so wearies him, he doesn't even know how to go to a city. He cannot even do the most basic, simple, logical, easy thing because he's such a fool. I know that life can be hard for a lot of reasons, and a lot of them are not things that we bring upon ourselves, right? Life can be hard because of weather. Life can be hard because of health problems. Life can be hard because of the economy. That's things that are out of your hand. Life can be hard because of social or cultural changes that are not in your power to control. Life can be very hard, and that's all true. But sometimes life is just hard because we make it hard. Right? Sometimes the reason why my life is hard is because I've made it hard for myself. And I can't even do easy things anymore because I've made it so difficult for myself. Because I've burned bridges, because I've made enemies when I didn't need to make enemies, because I held positions that I didn't need to hold. I defended something that I didn't need to defend that. I didn't need to stake my flag in that ground. Why did I do that? Sometimes life is hard because I make it hard. And so the fool so wearies himself, not because the world is too hard to live in, but because the fool makes his own world too hard for himself. So let's move on to this last section here. Pick up in verse 16. It says in Ecclesiastes 10, verse 16, "Woe to you, O land, whose king is a lad and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, O land, whose king is of nobility and whose princes eat at the appropriate time for strength and not for drunkenness. Through indolence the rafters sag, and through slackness the house leaks. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment, and wine makes life merry, and money is the answer to everything. Furthermore, in verse 20, in your bedchamber do not curse a king. In your sleeping room do not curse a rich man. For the bird of the heavens will carry the sound, and the winged creature will make the matter known." A little bit of discretion makes a big difference in life. Woe to you, O land, whose king is a lad and whose princes feast in the morning. Woe to you when your country, when your nation, when your kingdom is being run by somebody who only thinks of his own desires, who only thinks of his own appetite. Right? They're not, these princes, this king, these are people who are not eating because you need to eat, you need to take good care of yourself, you need nutrition and sustenance. They are eating because it's just fun. They're eating because they're bored. They're eating because they're wasteful and gluttonous, and they are taking the wealth and the vitality of their kingdom with them. Woe to you, O land, when you're run by somebody who's immature and wasteful and gluttonous. That's no way to run a country. But blessed are you when your king is noble and when your princes eat at the appropriate time for strength and not for drunkenness. So, of course, he's not saying it's wrong to eat. He's saying when you do eat, there's a purpose behind it. We eat because we want to take care of our bodies. We eat because we need nutrition and sustenance. We eat because eating is what gives us the energy to do the good work that we're called to do. And so, blessed are you, O land, when you see the example in your leadership of people who take care of themselves, who take care of the land, who make responsible, appropriate, mature decisions. Now, we're not just talking about food, of course. And we're not just talking about kings. Blessed is the family whose parents set a good example when it comes to self-discipline. Self-discipline in their physical activities, but more importantly, self-discipline in their spiritual activities. Blessed is the family when the parents are seen praying, when the parents are seen practicing discipline when it comes to sin and temptation, when it comes to worshiping God and making sure that God and the church are always the first priority that are set for the family. Blessed are you, O church, when you're the kind of church that has as its shepherds men of dignity and honor, men who have high regard for that personal discipline that we've been talking about, whose personal lives are a reflection of the good word of God that they're supposed to be proclaiming and defending. Through indolence, he says in verse 18. That's laziness, basically. Through indolence, the rafters slag. Through slackness, the house leaks. All it takes is a little bit of maintenance. You know, if you just kind of take care of the little things in a house or in a home or a garden, instead of waiting until you have 1,000 weeds, just pluck the 2 or 3 weeds that come up tomorrow. And that's how you maintain a garden. That's how you maintain a house. It is through laziness that these grand homes of ours, these lives of ours, start to fall apart. They go into disrepair. And just a little bit of preventative maintenance. Just a little bit of, I'm just going to touch that up over here and just fix that over there, and let's recaulk the bathtub on a regular basis. Let's clean the gutters out and make sure our gutters are clear. Let's weed the flower beds before it becomes a complete disaster. Just a little bit of effort can prevent a home from falling apart. And so I think with just a touch of cynicism, Solomon says in verse 19 that this is how people live. I want to make something clear. Verse 19 is not how we should live. Verse 19 is not saying this is the right way to live, this is the right attitude. Verse 19 is saying this is the approach that people have to life. This is the mentality that they bring to their lives. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment. They don't eat because it's good for you, because you need the sustenance, because it's what's important for your body. They just eat for enjoyment. That's all it is. It's just gluttonous. We just eat for the fun of it. I eat what tastes good. I don't care if it's good for me. I just eat it because it tastes good. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment, and wine makes life merry. Well, does it? I don't know. I have a hard time accepting that Solomon is saying this because it is this truth, like wine makes life merry. So go out and just enjoy life, right? You just drink and just have a great time with wine. It's interesting how in the book of Ecclesiastes, this statement is made that wine makes life merry. But you go back to the book of Proverbs, and yet it says in Proverbs chapter 23, beginning in verse 29 and going on down, in verse 29 through the end of the chapter, that the person who has woe and sorrow and contentions and complaining and wounds without cause and redness of eyes is the person who drinks. When they look at the wine sparkling in the cup and it tastes so smooth, and at the last it bites like a serpent and it stings like a viper. Solomon is not saying this is how you should live. He's saying this is how people do live. And money is the answer to everything. Money is the answer to everything. Well, based on chapter 2 and chapter 5 and chapter 6, clearly Solomon doesn't actually believe that money is the answer to everything. And so he concludes again in verse 20, "In your bedchamber, don't curse a king. In your sleeping room, do not curse a rich man. For a bird of the heavens carries the sound, and the winged creatures make the matter known." That's where we get the old phrase, "a little birdie told me." That's the origin of that phrase. "A little birdie told me." We talk about that like it's some kind of, like when you hear that somebody's going to have a baby, or that maybe that, a little birdie told me that you got someone in your life for Valentine's Day. A little birdie told me. That's where this comes from. Now, Solomon, of course, is not actually saying that if you speak ill of a rich man, or you say something nasty about the president, or, he's not literally saying that a bird is going to pick it up and report it to CNN or something like that. Okay, you're not going to get reported to the police. The police department doesn't have a row of birds like lined up on a windowsill, like giving away secrets from people in the neighborhood. What he's saying is that secrets tend to fly away like birds do. The things that you say in privacy, in your room, you think they're private. You think that it's in your room. You think that this is just confidential, just between the two of us. That's how it always starts. But it's amazing how that nasty thing that you said about somebody, that little piece of gossip that you decided to share with your friend or your spouse, it's amazing how that little thing gets picked up by a birdie and spreads. A little thing with big problems. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 is all about the power of little things. Sometimes little things are good. Other times, little things causes a great deal of trouble. So you need to be aware of the power that the little things are having in your life. I certainly hope that you'll tune in next week. We're getting very close to the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, and the writer is starting to bring his thoughts together to come to a very powerful conclusion in chapter 12 that you need to listen to. So tune in again next week for our next study. And as always, my friends, I hope that you have a wonderful and blessed day.